Okay, guys, welcome to the second informative lecture for your intro topic for forensics. Okay, we're going to talk about types of evidence today. So there are three major types of evidence. There's testimonial evidence, physical evidence, and trace evidence. So if you think of the word testimony and what that means, a testimonial evidence is evidence that includes oral or written statements, and those statements are collected or given to the police. It can include court testimony, but it is a witness's testimony, and that's why it's called testimonial evidence. Physical evidence actually refers to evidence that is physically present, either at a crime scene, primary, secondary, etc., that is collected and used in their actual items. They can be any type of physical things. Trace evidence is evidence that is actually the subset of physical evidence. All trace evidence is physical evidence, but it's in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. And that's why they call it trace. It's just so slight, there's only a little there, and it is a physical evidence. Sometimes you can't see it, so you'll use detection techniques to figure out that it's there, but that's why they call it trace evidence. Okay, we are going to really focus in this course, other than in the intro, on physical and trace evidence. During this intro part, we will talk a little bit about testimonial evidence, but we will look at, like we were in Australia saying, okay, we need scientific evidence, not just, oh, he did it, and I have a bunch of people say he did it. Alright, so, why do we collect evidence at a crime scene? What are we going to use it for? How does it work? Okay, so there's a lot of different things that we do with evidence. One is to actually prove a crime is committed. And I told you I was going to use my niece as an example. My niece and nephew were living just outside of Boston in an apartment. And it's in a town called Reading. And they both went to work. They'd just gotten engaged. She left the engagement ring at the house, and when they came back, and it was an apartment, they noticed that the apartment door was broken. And when they walked in and they looked around, some expensive stuff like the TV, the camera, and her ring were gone. And they called the police. Police came in and went through the apartment and came back out and said, gee, we're really sorry that they really trashed your apartment. Are you sure they only took these items? And my niece said, oh, don't be too sorry. That's kind of the way the apartment is. And yeah, we're sure they only took these few items. And the point is that the police have to know that a crime was actually committed. Now, they had evidence that with the broken Jimmy door, it was actually kicked in, and some of the other things they found besides the things that were missing, that there was a crime committed there. But sometimes something can look perfectly normal, and you don't know that there's actually a crime that's happened in that room or at that location. So evidence can lead to being able to establish an actual crime was committed. The evidence can be used to link all the key elements of a crime together, and that's a key word, link. Make sure there is a connection between these things. So when you think about looking at crime scenes, the biggest thing you are trying to do is you are trying to link everything together. You're trying to link the suspect to the crime scene, to the victim, and all of those have to be put together. Okay? Sometimes you have to actually figure out who the identity of the victim is. They may be missing their face, so you can't just, oh, let's take a picture of the person and figure out who they are. You might have to use other means to figure out who the person is, like receipts or a form of ID that was left behind, a purse, a wallet, a phone, something like that. At a crime scene, when you collect evidence, you want to find evidence that corroborates eyewitnesses' testimony. In other words, is it just made up testimony to point a finger at somebody, or is there some validity to it because the evidence goes along with what was seen at the crime scene? Then you also really collect evidence because you want to make sure you are not putting somebody who's innocent into jail. And then the last thing is when you're at a crime scene, it really gives the detectives a lead in what to do, how to go, where to go, who's the next suspect. So there's a lot of reasons for collecting evidence. Okay, so this is all in your notes, but a testimony evidence really is something that is given as an oral written statement. I've had to give testimonial evidence even just outside of our school. There was a incident where somebody tried to approach a young student and said something inappropriate to them very early in the morning. I was the only person in the parking lot, and I actually spoke to the person because they were acting as if they were lost. And I asked, "Are you okay? Do you know where you're going?" And the person walked by me. So I had to give testimonial evidence of what I thought the person looked like. And I really couldn't see them. They had a hoodie on. They had a HCCC hoodie. I still remember, gray with the green writing on it. And they had the hoodie pulled so tightly, could see nothing of their face at all. I couldn't even tell you what their complexion was like. Hands shoved in the pocket. So I couldn't tell you, was this person a white person? Was this person Oriental? I had no clue. But I had to give a testimony about what happened. So a lot of times eyewitness accounts can be useful. That's a starting point for investigators. But what they found over time is that they're not always really that reliable. There's a lot of things that can influence an eyewitness testimony. Things like how your day is going. Are you familiar with the area where something happens, or is it new to you? Are you really young? Are you really old? Because what they find out, believe it or not, is that really young children are very good eyewitnesses because they don't make things up. Their brain also doesn't fill in blank spots. It just essentially puts down in its memory what it sees. And really old people are actually really good witnesses because, again, they don't fill in blank spots with their brain, and usually they're not as preoccupied as people of the ages of like 18 to 75. So those are things that they're finding as they study what's it like to be an eyewitness. Okay, so we're going to do a little challenge. We're going to talk about observations the whole semester long. Making observations, pulling out information from written, especially since we're going to be doing this hybrid, guys. You're really going to be in a situation where you have to pull out information from things you read, pictures you see. You're not going to have things to feel and hold in front of you. Can't share those things with you right now. So you're going to have to use other types of investigative skills. We're going to do this. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. Whether you're at home doing this as, taking the notes ahead of time, whether you're doing this as a class, whether you're doing something remotely, I'm going to time you, and then I'm going to give you a blank screen where I'm going to say anywhere in your notebook, doesn't matter where, write down as many items as you can remember. Okay, so remember, 20 items. You can't write them down while you're staring at the screen. Don't cheat. Okay? It's not a quiz. I'm not giving you a grade. Just see, where's your mind at? Can you focus on the screen? Can you remember? How many of them can you commit to memory? Usually as a class, if I say, okay, let's brainstorm as a class, we almost always get all 20. It's hard individually. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next screen, and then I'm going to time you, and so it's 20 seconds. No cheating. Focus on the picture. No writing down anything. No cheating. Okay. Now, anywhere on a piece of paper, on the side of your notebook, in the margin, on a separate piece of paper, on the back flap of one of the covers of the books that you have. Write as many items as you can get. As many items. You got 2 minutes. If you really want to fast forward because you're like, oh, this is all I can get, this is all I remember, you can do that, but I will wait 2 minutes. Don't mind the air conditioning turning on, which you probably can hear over the mic. That is 1 minute past. You have 1 minute left. If you're having trouble, close your eyes and try to visualize the picture. Half a minute left. Can you get all 20? Ten seconds. Alright. We're going to stop there. I'm going to put the picture up. You're going to count how many you got right. If we're doing this together as a class, then I'm going to break us up and put them on the board. These were all the pictures. Then there's a little ranking, like how did you do. Hopefully you could remember more than 4. But, some people have trouble with pictures. They're better with actual words and numbers. Other people are quite visual and like pictures, and they think pictures more like if you were to look at a crime happen, you're watching things that happen, almost like a movie. So, memory retention is important. Okay, now, a lot of you might say, gee, I didn't do so great. Well, back around 2008, there was a huge launch into investigating people who had been incarcerated. A lot of them were violent crimes, and they were incarcerated on purely eyewitness testimony, circumstantial evidence and eyewitness testimony. Nothing truly scientific. On a lot of those crimes, tissue samples were taken, but the technology to run DNA wasn't like it is now. So, a lot of people petitioned, got involved with what's called the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project will essentially pay legal fees to somebody who's incarcerated if they also believe the person was incarcerated incorrectly, and they will go through whatever testing they need to do. So a lot of these convictions that were circumstantial have been overturned. So again, testimony evidence, there's a lot of things that affect a person's testimonial evidence. I'm not exactly sure you have the notes on the Innocence Project there. You just have to be aware the Innocence Project does exist. And if I don't have a notebook in front of me, so just remember it's the Innocence Project, right? And it overturns convictions through most of it through DNA testing. Okay, write it down in a margin. If I thought this slide is in there, you just don't have to write anything. Okay, now we're going to look at the types of evidence, because physical evidence now. We talked about testimonial. We're going to shift gears because this class really doesn't look at testimonial evidence except for this intro. We're going to do some things about watching a crime that happens, and we're going to answer some questions about watching a crime that's happened. And if you are doing it remotely and you do it honestly, you don't keep backing up on the video and replaying it, then you'll see that sometimes your opinion can be swayed by others. So in our class, when we really start to do investigation into forensics, we are going to look at hard physical evidence. We don't do bullets or firearms, we don't do ballistics, but in the spring we do glass evidence. We will definitely, even if you're remote, because there's things we can do individually with fingerprints where we don't have to pass things back and forth. And I might even be able to do scanning of people's fingerprints, so we may even still be able to do this lab by doing it virtually, in the sense that you get an electronic file of the data. But we will be doing a lot on fingerprints. Organs, yes, organs can be evidence, because there's a huge black market for organs out there. And organs can actually be used for a lot of different things. A liver can tell you a lot of the toxins that a person has when you do an autopsy. So there's a bunch of stuff that can come from that. Hair is a type of trace evidence that can be left behind. Paint is also can be regular physical evidence or trace evidence. Sometimes when there's a hit and run, pieces of the paint from the car, because the car ends up having damage, will end up in a victim, and those pieces of paint can be scanned by chemistry means and physical science means, and most manufacturers log what they use to make their paint colors. So a forensic scientist can send out to a bunch of the manufacturers of cars and say, hey, here's my composition of a paint chip on a hit and run where somebody died. And a manufacturer may go, oh yeah, that's on our Toyota Celica from 1972. Right? So then they're like, okay, now we're looking for a 1972 Toyota Celica. Okay, we will look at blood, but we won't look at other bodily fluids. When we do toxicology, we have simulated urine we look at. When we do our blood analysis, we have simulated blood to look at. You guys, if I can, what I'll have you do, because I do have a lot of droppers, and I might be able to give you each an individual dropper so you can actually do the lab, but you will be doing it by yourself. You will not have a partner. So again, you're going to have to do work. If you're sitting there going, oh, I'm going to just skate through, it's forensics, I'm not going to have to do very much, you may want to talk to your guidance counselor, because it is a lot of work. Okay. Footprints come under impressions, just like fingerprint is an impression. The footprint and teeth imprints and other types of impressions have their own category. Fingerprints are kind of singled out because they're used so much as evidence that is get its own little database, etc. So we here in this class focus on fingerprints, and even though it's still an impression, we talk about other impressions separately, like lint prints and a lot of things, ear prints. We will, we actually won't do anything with plastic and rubber other than look at fibers that are made synthetically, polymers like polyester. But other than that, we don't do a lot with rubber. We will look at documents. We won't do anything with gun residue. We will, in toxicology, look at drugs. Soil and minerals we won't actually analyze as a sample of physical evidence, but we'll talk about imprints and how you make imprints and what's the difference between the different soils and how well does a print make in different soils. We don't investigate explosives. Tool markings go along with impressions. You can have different types of accelerants from petroleum products. So when we study arson, you will actually study the difference between certain accelerants. How hot do they burn? How clean do they burn? What does the color of the smoke mean? What does the color of the flame mean? Okay. If we have time, and we'll see where we're at in January, guys, we could do serial number restoration. And then we do work on fibers that are both synthetic and natural, and we'll go into all those types of evidence. Okay, these are two definitions you absolutely need to know. Okay, so this is a slide where you should circle it, asterisk it, right? This definition, what is class evidence? You need to know the definition, and you need to know the example. Okay, there's a lot of different things that are class evidence. But class evidence means, like, you're in a class right now. The class is a group of people. So the evidence can only narrow down the suspects to a group of people. So that's why it says it's associated with a group and never attributed to one single source. A blood type. There are many people in the world that have blood type O. There are many people in the world that have blood type A. Blood type AB is rare, but that puts you into a group. There are many people in the world that have dark brown hair. There are many people in the world that have blue eyes. There are many people who wear a white cotton t-shirt on a daily basis. All those things. So I'm going to just explain on this because a lot of times I'll say in an activity, give me examples, and people are sitting there going, I really can't give you an example for a group of evidence. But again, color of your hair. Type of shirt. A white cotton t-shirt. Color of your eyes. Something like that. That's all class evidence. Now, individual evidence, and this is the way it is defined. Okay, so it's hard to say to you, oh, don't say it just means it goes to one person. It is associated with a common source to a high degree of probability. Okay, that is individual evidence. So even though I say fingerprints can identify somebody, this is a level of probability. It is 98% probable that that person has that fingerprint is associated to a particular person. That is the testimony. It's a probability. 98% probable that fingerprint is associated with the suspect. Right? A very rare genetic disease can be highly attributed to it. DNA mapping. Okay, and this is nucleic DNA from the nucleus. Right? If you had mitochondrial DNA, that would be a group or a class evidence. Mitochondrial only puts people back to a common mom. Right? It's not an individual. It doesn't say, oh, this belongs to Harry. It would be, oh, Harry, Jane, and Dave all have the same mom, if they all did. So you would know, okay, I've narrowed my group from mitochondrial DNA. Nucleic DNA goes to the individual person. So you have to be careful with this, with individual evidence. If you had a very, very unique piece of clothing, okay, like somebody knitted or crocheted you a very particular ugly sweater, and someone saw that ugly sweater, and they said, oh, Dave owns that ugly sweater. Maybe that was Dave. And they go to Dave's house, and Dave has the ugly sweater, and the person says, yeah, that was the ugly sweater. And there's only one ugly sweater that would be considered, like that, I should say, one ugly sweater that has that design, because it was knitted just for Dave. Then that would be an individual. But it has to be to the individual and a high degree of probability. Okay. Last thing today is, what evidence would you collect? We have a picture in front of you. There's lots of stuff there. I'm going to give you a minute. Actually, what I'm going to say to you is pause the video and circle or write down all the things that you would collect. Just pause it. I'm going to keep going in a second, but you pause and you write down everything you can see there. Go ahead and do it, because this is part of the course. Okay, so I'm going to circle a few things. One thing that sticks out is the red can. Not only would you collect the red can, you'd also take samples of the liquid in it. Okay, so you get the can and the liquid inside the can. Right. Let's see if I can zoom in a little. Right. You might look around and say, "Oh, we've got all these." Oh, I think it's because I zoomed in. It's not letting me circle anymore. Hey, stop. Sometimes, guys, I can be technically challenged with this. So we have the beer cans. Now, there's a lot of things you can get off the beer cans. You can look for fingerprints. You can look for saliva. You can actually test the contents to make sure was the beer poisoned or laced with something. Okay, so I'm going to blow this up again. We have an item here. Okay, which when you blow that up, and I can't do this when we're projecting it, that person looks like they're holding something. It almost looks like that could be a weapon. Okay. There's also a bag right here. Sorry. There's a bag right here. There is a stick over here. You might say, well, it's a stick. You never know what's on that stick. There's a stain here, so we're going to scrape it. And another thing that people don't think about looking for is just trash in the general area, because trash can also lead to any type of evidence that's there. So there's a ton of stuff to take here and to bag. You probably even bag samples of the clothing. You take a general assessment. You might even look at the bottom of the shoes and say, is there anything on the bottom of the shoes? There's a lot of stuff to look at in this picture. Okay, so think about evidence when we go into what would you collect and what would you do here. All right, so we're going to stop there and we'll talk about evidence and worksheets.